the topic for today is AI power research. I'm Juan Pellicer, the VP of Research at Centaura, and we have been working with AI tools pretty much since the beginning, at least with GPT 3.5 back in November 2022. And back then, it was already mind-blowing how it could do something like one-shot code that could take us maybe drawing a chart like 20 minutes, a complex one with different requirements. Being able to do that, yes, in one shot back then was shocking. That's nothing compared to what's available nowadays. So the presentation is going to be a quick overview on different tooling that is available nowadays and how it can help you with any research purposes that you want to do on DeFi or Web3, crypto, etc. So in terms of the contents, we will be covering first some Centaura updates as usual. Then we will define what we understand as research in crypto specifically. And then we'll pass through some first easy applications that maybe someone might not be applying right now, but are pretty easy. We'll start to increase a bit more the complexity or the use cases, becoming maybe more niche, but also very interesting, touching on context engineering or how to craft effective prompts as well. We'll also touch on how we can leverage AI for learning new concepts as well. We'll do a review of different deep research functionality from some frontier LLM models. We'll touch on visual diagrams, which is also a feature that is often not much used and is a staple in the research bag. And lastly, we will wrap up with vibe coding, which last year has been the hottest topic and probably one of the more interesting that is advancing the fastest. So with that, in terms of Centaura updates, we just launched the Aave Horizon dashboard into our risk radar. You can visit the website down here and check it. It's basically the real world asset instance of Aave. And we have a bunch of metrics available. So feel free to take a look at them and provide any feedback that might be valuable for us. Also, we just crossed last week over 500 million in TVL into our curated vaults through Euler and Camino. So if you are seeking for very risk-averse yield opportunities, you can head over those two DeFi protocols and you will find some vaults that are being managed at the moment by us. So research and crypto. Where it falls the research activities that are being done at the moment professionally on crypto or DeFi. And I think that there are mainly two branches. The first one is the most obvious, which is academic research, which usually is done over longer time horizons. It's very focused on publishing papers that are peer-reviewed and mostly try to come up with new concepts or validate theories. And usually require a very deep expertise onto a single topic. Usually what we do at Centaura and is done by other firms in crypto is more sort of applied research where we are trying to solve real world problems. It's a field that is very interdisciplinary, meaning that it overlaps several different sectors like quantitative trading, with DeFi-specific knowledge like AMMs, lending protocols, also some crypto-specific knowledge like could be tokenomics as well. And of course, always at the shadow of the traditional finance primitives that we know already. Usually these activities have faster iteration cycles and the outputs tend to be reports or maybe some risk models or trading strategies, or at the end, any kind of actionable insight. So usually, as shown below, this requires some more of a kind of broader knowledge. and not go as deep into a single topic as usually academic research does, that they just focus on a single vertical and try to go as deep as possible. So the different applications that I'm going to present are going to be related mostly to applied research, even though many of these tools can be used for other purposes, for academic research or maybe for other things in crypto, like marketing or BD, they can be used as well. So one of the main problems in crypto is how to stay up to date, right? It's super challenging, and there is not a way that everyone does. It's basically to each their own, and people try to keep up as much as possible. Usually the main source tends to be your X timeline, which is not optimal, right? We know that is usually very biased. At the end, it's very optimized for your likes. Lately, also, there is a lot of low quality AI made content, usually called slop. Also, it's very drama driven. And there is an incentive to this concept of doom scrolling, which is to keep scrolling, getting new news, which is not ideal, right? Other usual sources tend to be news sites. The problem, some of them are great, but they tend to lack some key events, and usually they are not the most up to date. In crypto, we have also seen how many people rely on Telegram group chats. The main problem here is that the signal to noise ratio is very low. There is a lot of conversations going on, and it's very hard to keep up. There are some good attempts on DeFi, mostly based on some curated accounts on X and some Telegram channels that I think that are particularly interesting. I added 3 of them here in case that anyone wants to check up. So one potential solution to keep up with everything going on is an LLM that tries to ingest and compress the most recent DeFi or crypto chatter. So maybe it's an obvious one, but not used by anyone on crypto. Grok is the major winner here, right? We know that most of the crypto conversation happens on X. And yeah, it's a tool that is free with an account, has very generous limits, and is extremely good for sentiment analysis. This is an area that was usually performed through the Twitter API, which was extremely expensive. So nowadays, we are just a prompt away to try to compress all of those news and data and sentiment into an output of an LLM, right? So it's also the latest version, Grok 4.1, is very clever, very capable. It's also extremely good for tool using, which is more of a sort of advanced use case. But some of the prompt examples that I have been trying and work very well is like asking for the latest DeFi protocol launches in the last week, seeking for liquidity mining incentives as well, since those are usually published on the main accounts, X accounts of these protocols or blockchains. Also for airdrop farming is very good to come up with new ones. To gauge consensus on something like macroeconomic decisions, like a potential Fed rate cut in December, is also really interesting. Or summarizing some major topic that everyone is speaking about. In this case, maybe the AI private credit situation, which for some people on crypto might not be super aware, is going to be able to come up with a very compact summary that will allow us to keep up with everything going on. Okay, so one of the requirements when doing research is to have access to raw data where we can leverage do an analysis and come up with insights. So the good news is that there are AI tools nowadays that streamline this process a lot. So one of my favorites that was launched recently is Llama AI by DeFi Llama, which probably is nowadays the best specialized LLM for crypto and DeFi. And this is thanks to a very good implementation, but at the same time, DeFi Llama coming up as I call it the crypto data lake, because they have data for crypto on all fronts, from TBL, yields. They also have news, hack data, market caps, revenues. So if we can leverage all of that compression in data, we can come up with really interesting outputs. Also surprising how good it is with charting capabilities with the data they have. And also they allow to download raw CSV data, which is extremely helpful. So on the right, you can see an example where I was trying to come up with a very specific dashboard where I wanted data that is not directly available on DeFi Llama on their main sections. And I wanted to overlap the BTC price against the central daily TBL changes, and was able to pull it off in one shot. So this makes it way easier than in the past, where we had to rely on calling their REST API through Python scripts, or maybe ingesting this data in the cloud in a database, and then running some SQL to query and get some raw data. It's not free in this case. It requires a pro subscription, which is about $50 monthly, but they have done a pretty good job, and I encourage anyone to try it out, because it's been very, very helpful so far. So now we get a little bit deeper into how to use LLMs efficiently, and we feel that the first step that is often overlooked is to work more on context building. So it's probably the piece where you should spend the most time before asking to an LLM. In the pipeline, in terms of how much time shall we spend, I think that to get them the most efficient output, usually one wants to allocate the most time on building that context. And then one can move into defining the prompt as best as possible, and then will be the interaction with the LLM. So how DeFi works is that there are different sources of data, and not all of them have the same quality. Here I'm coining the term of canonical, meaning documentation or guides or dev resources that come directly from blockchains or protocols. When we are asking to an LLM about something specific of DeFi, it's often overweighting on news articles and things that might not be the best source, right? So if we can somehow prepare the context of our chat with resources that come up directly from the source, like also smart contract source code, or any kind of discussions on the governance forum, audit reports more for the technical side, or postmortems, or even official communications like X threads, we are going to come up with an output that is going to be way better than if we let the LLM just rely on their background data that was made for training mostly. So the idea is to try to spend a good chunk of the time before asking the LLM building that context. The problem with that, getting that context ready, is that it's extremely time consuming, right? If we want to, the most practical example is if we want to strat all the documentation of a protocol, usually this has been done by hand, just going to a Git book, copying each page, pasting to a new document, and assembling a kind of external documentation document that we can feed into the LLM. So nowadays, we don't need to do that anymore. And there are a lot of different tools that can help to automate all of these context building activities. Here I have been just listing about 4 of them. They are pretty well known. There are way more that are being used at the moment, and maybe some of them have better versions or alternatives that are even faster or easier to use nowadays. So to give a quick rundown on those, the first one will be Gina, here on the left, where basically it allows to convert any page to a text file with just the text content of that page. So by simply adding before the URL of a website r.gina.ai, we are going to get a text file that only contains the text. So from there, we can download that text file and feed to the context of our chat. We will require for some of these pages, like the Gitbook documentation, some activities like crawling and scraping. So for that, there are tools nowadays that are optimized for AI use, like could be Crawl for AI, where they have a very extensive documentation on how to use this tool to just go over several documents of the same website and try to get all the text data that we need. Also massively helpful, and I will touch more on it, is RepoMix, which allows us to compress source code on GitHub into a single file, which can become extremely helpful to get the implementation of how a protocol was done and be able to better understand it, for example. Also, there are specialized tools for Gitbook, a Python script that just allows to scrape all the data on Gitbook into a single file. Or there are currently initiatives of having a standard called llms.text, which is mostly a file that is added to the root URL of a website and allows to have, for example, all the documentation of an API just added in a single text file. This requires the developers of that website to have that file available. But we can see how there are a lot of developers that are adding this already. And I was just doing a check on this website that tries to include as many projects supported by this standard as possible. And just by writing scan, I saw that there are several different block explorers that are adding this file to be able mostly to interact with their API in AI matter, let's say. But yeah, on finance, there were about more than 100 different services that were providing it. So it always is worth to double check if the documentation that you are checking has support for this standard. And probably the ones that we use the most is RepoMix. This is a tool that just with pasting a GitHub repository link is going to pack it up into an XML file. So XML files are, it's been shown that is a format that the AI understands the best, since all the scraping that has done on their training data has been done over websites, and the output of that scraping was done over XML. So usually it's a preferred format over Markdown. So if we paste a GitHub URL here and we click back, what we will get locally is an XML file that is going to include all the source code of all the files and source code of the GitHub repository that we're interested. So it's going to be super lean. It will not weigh a lot, usually less than 1 megabyte. So we can keep the context of our chat super lean and be able to provide even more documents. So for anyone interacting with source code, this is probably one of the most useful tools out there. So not so long ago, the frontier models like Claude came up with in their web app capability called projects, where it allows to have a dedicated workspace where we can have a conversation with a shared pool of resources. So what we can do is to send different chats into this project page, and all of them will be sharing the same resources or materials. So we can create a kind of knowledge base, and it allows us to give custom instructions to for the model to understand what are we speaking about. Also has memory over different conversations, and it has a wide support for files from PDFs to CSVs to Markdown. From the Gemini, Claude, and ChatGPT, I think that Claude one is the superior one, always in terms of usability. Claude is ranking very high up there. And for DeFi research specifically, this means that we don't need to be carrying local files that are going to be all the time pasted into our chat. And we can have just isolation where one project will be specifically just for one topic, and we won't be need to be iterating all the time over the same topic. So a practical example could be if we are learning about how Uniswap V4 works, we could open a new project, paste the documentation on that context, maybe some hook contracts or audits or governance discussion, or even the source code. And we can go from there and just ask questions about the protocol, and the output will be super accurate because it will be taking those source materials. This is how it's looking at the moment, a cloud project on the web app, where basically we can see how we can set a title and a system instruction, and then we can have the usual chat that we are used to. We can have the project knowledge on the right, which is mostly this context building that I mentioned, where all the chats that you will have on this project will share the same materials. But we can also go in one chat with a specific file if we want to add it, if we just want to have an output that is referencing that file. So next on the pipeline will be prompting, and usually we have seen how people don't spend as much as possible on their prompts. I think the best path here is to follow some of the frameworks that are online. Each person has their own, and there are a lot of different ones, but usually they share the same topics, right? So first of all is to set the persona that we are going to be speaking. So in this case, we want to set who should act on the LLM and in which domains they have expertise. It's also very helpful to have a context paragraph where we are referencing the materials that we provided before. There is always, of course, a task where we want to specify very clearly what's the objective, or what's the output, and what we want to have done. It's also extremely helpful to add some hints on the format that we are expecting, if this should be a report, how long should be, which is the tone, the length, the scope, if it's a dashboard, if we want to add some charts or some raw data, some tables. Also, sometimes for more coding things, it's usually a good idea to have a list of steps to follow. And if possible, adding examples will help a lot to guide the output of the LLM. It's also a good idea to just have some do's and don'ts, right? With things to avoid, or what things it should focus on the output. As a reminder, usually these prompts can take a bit of time. So it's better if they work well to save them, because it's possible in the future might need to be reused. So yeah, saving them on the same folder can be very effective as well. So on the topic of learning or research, many times we spend time learning how something works, and AI tools can help a lot in this front as well. So one realization when working a lot with LLMs is that they are extremely good to move through different abstraction layers, right? So when we are setting the target audience for the output of our chat, what we are doing on the background is setting the target abstraction level, right? It's not the same. The same is not going to be. The output is not going to be as useful as if there is a Solidity developer reading that output rather than a DeFi user, right? So we always want to try to target the abstraction layer that we are interested in. This will be extremely useful when working with low-level materials like source code. So the most dominant example of this, when GPT 3.5 came out, is explain a difficult concept like if I'm 5 years old, right? Let's say that this is like the highest abstraction layer. But by being able to go deeper into that abstraction layer and explain things with an evolving level of detail, we can learn a concept in a better way. So usually if we are providing some very technical materials, it's always helpful to just say, hey, explain me like this DeFi protocol, like if I'm a DeFi power user, for example, or maybe a complex financial primitive that we don't fully understand. Is really interesting to us to an LLM for a higher level of abstraction. So it will try to come up with the essence of that and explain in an easier way. Also, it's extremely good with analogies. So searching equivalents of DeFi primitives into TradFi, it's also a way that we have found that can be very, very helpful. So this iterates on the concept of learning through moving in different abstraction layers. And usually we want to understand a concept in the simplest way possible and then get down little by little. And maybe at some point we don't understand some of the more detailed explanations and we might need to go up again to a higher level. And at the end, by moving to these different levels, we can understand a complex topic in a very easy way. And of course, for learning, the tool that is being the most used is Notebook LLM from Google. I think it's being used widely on universities at the moment. To be honest, I didn't use it as much, but it has some very interesting capabilities. So by sharing materials into the web app, we can have access to some sort of different features. One of the most popular ones is the audio overview, where basically it crafts a podcast between two persons where they try to go on a very high level on how the materials that you provided work. So for things that might be more daunting, like long papers that we might not have as much time to review, if we want to have a kind of a podcast experience, is a very interesting learning material. Of course, they have been adding a lot of features like quizzes and flashcards, which for learning can be extremely helpful as well. So yeah, take a look at it and play with it because so far has been a very successful product and it's mostly targeted on learning. So let's go over the most famous features for research are probably these deep research capabilities that all the frontier models have at the moment. Usually the process when toggling this feature into the chat UI is a two-phase approach. First, it will try to come up with a research plan where we'll ask input to us if we want to tweak it, if we think it's fine, if it should check different sources. And after tweaking that, it will continue consulting hundreds of sources ideally and generating finally a report. So here the major differentiation factor is the quality of the sources that each model is going to pick up, right? I've been trying extensively the three major ones with Gemini 2.5 Pro, Sonnet from Claude 4.5, and OpenAI ChatGPT. And each of them has their own quirks, right? One of the one that probably I don't like the most is Gemini 2.5 Pro because it tries usually over indexes in terms of their Google searches. So it ends up picking up a lot of news materials that have been rated by ELO. So usually they are not as useful since news can be recycled material and not close to a source. My favorite would be Sonnet, Claude from Sonnet, either Opus or Sonnet, both are very good because it really understands that it should weight more the official documentation of this protocol or blockchains. And also the amount of sources that it picks up is tremendous, it's on the hundreds. So for me, has been the one providing the best results. ChatGPT, the research is fine as well. I just find not the best that it always fills the report with very large sections on regulatory and safety topics, which for this research materials is not ideal, right? But still, the latest ones were versions of deep research on ChatGPT were very, very good. So the number of sources matter to some extent, but at the end, the quality of what it picks up is the most important one. One of the major cons with this deep research feature is that validating everything that it outputs is extremely time consuming. It comes up with a lot of data, and validating each of those data points takes a lot of time. And as we know, as you know, the cutoff dates for LLMs tend to be in the past, so usually it doesn't have the most up-to-date material. For this reason, I think that always creating your context in a regular LLM chat usually is preferred for important work rather than deep research. But if you are looking to get exposure to a certain topic that you don't know anything about, I think that is a very, very valuable feature that should be used by anyone on research. So my recommendation is to try the three major ones and see the one that you like the most, but the three of them are very, very capable. So here I'm adding an example with the Sonnet 4.5, and we can see how it took it about 7 minutes, and it ingested almost 500 sources, which is insane, right? In this case, I asked to create a comparative overview of the different DeFi bridge protocols. And it's also very, very handy how we can see a summary of the kind of sources that it got on the right. And we can see how it relied on pages like Medium, which could be official publications from these different DeFi bridge protocols. DeFi Llama, relying on data, is very good. GitHub, to understand the source code, is also a very good reference. Then official website of these bridges like Wormhole. So to me, it looks like it took sources that are very important and probably someone manually would have taken if it would be creating this kind of report. Also, we can see a summary of some of the insights that it draw based on different sources, and you can take a look, and they are very, very accurate. So yeah, I would say that for deep research purposes, Claude is winning here. For a comparison, I just add the same with GPT 5.1 thinking, and oddly, in this case, it just picked up about 14 sources. We can see how many of these sources were news articles, which is not ideal. It's true that it took it about 36 minutes. Probably it's because I pick up the thinking model since it's superior, but it's a very slow model, right? So if we don't pick thinking, probably we are looking at about the same time of Claude, maybe a little bit more. In some cases, you might see that it picks more sources, but in this case, it was clearly Claude the winner. So visual diagrams are extremely helpful to explain concepts, to learn new materials, and creating these ones with AI is something that is extremely easy, and seems that not many people are doing, and they are mostly drawing their diagrams manually, which nowadays is not the most optimal, right? So I would say that there are two approaches here. We can ask to one of these web apps on frontier models to create a diagram directly. Or what we can do, which I think is more interesting, is to ask to these LLMs to create the source code that will generate this diagram. So usually if we are targeting for speed, we can use this direct diagram creation feature, which Claude, both Sonnet and Opus are very, very good at it. They can render directly in the app a diagram, as I will show. But the general idea is that LLMs are extremely good at code, and nowadays there are diagram tooling that allows just to input the code and get a replicable output. So that's better if we want the flexibility to tweak some things, to change the format. Will be always preferred to go with code. What Claude is using in the background is Mermaid, which little by little has become almost the standard for code-generated diagrams, I would say. They also have some platforms live where one can just paste the source code that the LLM is providing and see the diagram rendered there. So Mermaid.live is one that works well. I'm aware that there are other standards like UML that are more like software development specific, but for general uses of diagrams, Mermaid has been a lifesaver. So here there is an example of a diagram that Claude created directly just by sharing with in the chat the source code of Morpho-V2. So I took the Morpho GitHub, I passed it through RepoMix, the tool that I showed before to get a source code into a single file, and I pasted that source code into an LLM chat and asked for a diagram. In this case, it came with not only one diagram, but like 3 diagrams. One of them was this sequence diagram where you can see each entity on different columns. And over time, in this case, the deposit flow, we can see how the user interacts with Evolve V2 by depositing assets. There is an adapter in the middle, then there's a protocol at the end, and there are other entities like the locator and the curator. So it's extremely easier to understand a protocol if we just can look at these diagrams, for example. I didn't have to paste any source code. It was just provided by Claude. But if we go with ChatGPT or Gemini 3, like in this case, it doesn't have, as far as I know, the diagram rendering capabilities, but it was able to provide me with Mermaid code, and I pasted that code into the platform that I mentioned before, Mermaid.live, and I came up with this very beautiful architecture diagram, which is showing the different components of the new Morpho-V2. We can see how it's pretty accurate with all the roles and governance on the right, the core capabilities of the vault, this outer layer that they have on the side. So yeah, extremely useful, and I didn't have to touch anything on the code. I just had to ingest the source code and ask the LLM. So the last point is on vibe coding, which has been extremely popular. We could say that it's a different way of coding, right? It's coding in a way where we might not need to touch much or edit much the code. It's just going through a conversation where we have very well defined which is the output that we want, and we will let the LLM generate the code and render it if needed. So here the main focus should be on the intent and the outcome that we want to see. And it's a very iterative process. It's usually very hard to get the output that we want in one shot, but we hope to get 99% there after iterating with a couple of chats. So this allows, of course, to ship extremely fast. Usually, these were development cycles that could take long. So there are also some CLI tooling like Codex, Cloud Code, or Gemini CLI that are extremely helpful. I will show some examples on those as well. But they just allow to interact with LLM from a terminal and be able to have an output in a very fast way. So for anything related to data analysis on DeFi, pulling some scripts rapidly, getting on-chain data, parsing events, interacting with APIs is extremely helpful. Visualizations and dashboards is also something that it does extremely well. Particularly interacting with the smart contracts for rain data was something that took a lot of time. You had to understand specifically how the smart contract works, how to query, set up the node, interact with some different libraries. Nowadays, this can be done through vibe coding directly. So yeah, things like backtesting strategy ideas, not recommended, but can also aid with financial stuff. parsing data like governance proposals can be done as well from a CLI. So yeah, we optimize for speed over perfection. Will be almost impossible to get something 100% perfect. We will lose some of the traceability where we might not understand fully the code. And if the project keeps growing, there will be a lot of technical debt that will accumulate and will be harder to maintain the project, right? So still will be recommended to have the domain knowledge to validate everything that the code is outputting. So the three main CLI tools at the moment, the first one released was Cloud Code, which to this day is the best one in terms of usability. Right after that one, I think that was OpenAI Codex that came up. Their Codex models are the best one on the industry at the moment. So even though their tools are less capable than Claude, the output that they get, in my opinion, is a little bit better. These two require subscriptions, while Gemini from Google doesn't require any subscription, and their latest model are extremely capable. So yeah, I recommend to check at least Codex and Cloud Code because they are very very good. So which are the problems is that they require some familiarity with working in the terminal, which for people that haven't done any software classes can be a little bit cumbersome, but nowadays it's very, very easy to use. It's true that they were designed for Linux and Mac, but nowadays they can be run through Windows with the Windows subsystem for Linux. This is just a matter of downloading Ubuntu or Debian from the Windows App Store, launching it and installing these CLI tools. So there is also some new features that are very, very interesting for Cloud Code and Codex, where we can interact with these models without having to install these applications, just by going to the web app or mobile app and setting a GitHub repository. These tools are able to just interact with that GitHub repository without us having to be locally on a desktop. So this opens up the possibility to work on the go without ever touching a line of code, which is very, very interesting. For production grade code, usually we see that the people have been using it a lot on IDEs like VS Code or Cursor because they allow to have better insight into which things are changing into a code. So it gives a better understanding rather than seeing line changes into a terminal. So yeah, it's also they have support for these extensions in most IDEs, and it's a preferred method if we are developing and coding along these CLI tools. So the very opinionated comparison for me would be that Cloud Code has the best UX, has the most features. Their models are extremely capable. They offer this modality of changing between asking mode, where it won't change anything, just a yes, and implementing mode, where it will start to do some modifications to the code. Codex for me is the most capable one, at least as November 2025. It's extremely capable. It comes up with solutions that work, and it doesn't require to go back and forth as much. It can run for a long period of time, sometimes on the like 10 minutes, half an hour, without requesting any input, and come up with a model that with an output that works. Also, it allows this model switching between GPT-5 Codex, which is a specific model for the Codex CLI tool, and GPT-5 Thinking, which is very, very good for planning and asking questions about some of the code. The con is that their CLI tool is not as customizable, or it doesn't have as many features as Cloud Code. But at the end, it gets the work done. So lately, it's been the one that has been the most popular, I would say, even though there are still many people using Cloud because it's kind of more engineering copilot, let's say, than Codex. And lastly, Gemini CLI. We still have to evaluate Gemini 3 that came up last couple of weeks, I think, last week. I think it's been used less. It was forked from Codex, if I'm correct. And it seems that on the first iteration is too eager to add new code when it just needs to do some modifications that Codex will have picked up at the beginning. And yeah, vibe coding is fun and easy, but as soon as we have any problem, vibe debugging is a mess since we lose the traceability of the code and what we are doing. It can become very very problematic. So for big projects, it's still a challenge to fully use pipe coding tools, let's say. And lastly, we're in crypto, so we know that many people are aware of the privacy concerns of sharing some private data with these tools. Thankfully, nowadays there are tools that allow us to run things locally. This is a screenshot of OpenCode, which is pretty much like a copy of Cloud Code or Codex. It's open source and it allows to plug in any LLM that we want to. It also can leverage local models that can be run locally in your PC. We just need a powerful GPU, which can be expensive, but also we can leverage cheaper models. I recommend for that Open Router, which is like the main hub to connect to different AI models. And yeah, same as we have pipe coding tools that are more private, we also have capabilities to run private chats through tools like Olama or LM Studio. But again, it will need a very good GPU on our machine to be able to run those. And here I wanted to share an example of a dashboard that was mostly vibe coded, where we were just running an example of different Ethena yields between the PT tokens and the underlying SUSD yield. In this case, it was able to leverage this famous library Web3Py, which is mostly used for data science when interacting with on-chain data. It's a library that is not trivial to use and was able just passing the specification of the API to be able to use it and get on-chain data, which in the past was particularly difficult. Connecting with the RPC and querying was able to be done entirely by Codex. It also has the advantage that in the past, even if we could come up with such a dashboard, we will need to host that dashboard into a website and engage maybe with some front-end developer. Nowadays, they can output these kind of dashboards into a single HTML file. And this is preferred because we can just share that file with people rather than having to host the whole website. So yeah, very capable. It even inferred, I didn't change the colors or anything. I just give the branding guidelines of Centaura and it was able to come up with all the formatting. And how we do that? Well, beyond using these CLI tools, is a very good practice to have a very ordered directory structure. So here is a sample of how it would look like for such a project like a dashboard, as I mentioned, where we will have different folders. One of them will be for the outputs that we want to analyze, like dashboards or PDF reports, brand assets in case that you are targeting a dashboard and you want to have your brand on it. Data is always super helpful to have an output of the raw data into a single folder just to check that everything is fine, or to input that data somewhere else. The source code actually is better to have them in a separate folder where we can keep track of it. As I mentioned before, it's a good idea to always save the prompt in case that it gets reused in the future. Also, persistency is important because when we are in one of these vibe coding sessions, we usually have to leave and come back another day. So it's always a good idea when we close any of these tools, they will give us like a session ID that we can save in a file and remember which is that ID. So when we open up Codex again, for example, we can just point to that session ID and we'll be on the same position of the messages where we left. config files also are very helpful to not have everything hard coded into the code and just being able to tweak a parameter and not have to run the LLM again. We just run the code directly. Git repository, virtual environments, these are very, very common on data science. The requirements for libraries on Python as well. And lastly, there are a couple of files that are very handy when working with Cloud Code or Codex, which is this agents.md or cloud.md, where we are specifying how we want the LLM to work. It can be understood like a system instruction mostly. And usually I also like to have a readme.md file that is giving a good overview of how the project is working and what we are trying to achieve. Also, it's been a godsend since working on Python, this UV tool. It allows to keep track of all the dependencies in a better way, to just not have to rely as much on virtual environments and be able to work faster on Python for auto-contained applications has been great as well. So the key takeaways will be first that there are no model that is superior than the others. Over the last months, we have seen how it really depends on preferences because all the frontier models are extremely capable. GPT 5.1, Opus 4.5, Gemini 3, all of them are benchmarking really high. There is this meme where they are all the time. There is one company is releasing the best model. Supposedly now we are with Claude Opus 4.5. We are here, and it's a matter of growth to launch a more capable model. But any of these three, it's been shocking how good they are. We also have to understand that there are some models that are very good for specific use cases. In this case, GPT 5.1 Codex is very good for code. GPT 5.1 Pro, I found that is very good with more for the academia, for papers, for example. Cloud models, they really excel at anything related to engineering, creating dashboards, even generation of spreadsheets, which is one of the latest features that they add, is very helpful. Gemini is an all-rounder, also cheaper model usually. Lately, it's been the best for image generation, which we didn't cover much on this presentation, but overall it's very solid as well. Also, our conclusion is that the coding paradigm has changed, right? Even if we don't vibe code, at least there are clear speed increases in major and minor tasks. So from creating boilerplate code to documenting the code, generation of PR messages, backfinding, creating test cases. Nowadays, it's a no-brainer to leverage some of these tools for coding purposes. Still, I advocate to keep control of the use that we do. I like this idea of keeping it as a copilot rather than trusting 100% of their output. Sometimes they're wrong. They are not deterministic. So it's always better to have very clear which is the purpose that we have, what is the output that we are expecting, and validate all of the data that we get. And of course, not rely on it for safety critical things like smart contract codes. I think we are not there yet to fully bytecode the smart contracts. And even if we were able, I would recommend not to, because these are things that require 100% attention, control, and fully understanding of everything going on into the code. So yeah. I will wrap up with this quote from Steve Jobs that is extremely interesting nowadays. He said that computers are like a bicycle for our minds. So I'm wondering if he will use the current LLM models, what he will think about them. So yeah, that's to wrap up. Next webinar will be on December 17. We'll be speaking about DeFi cover as one of the missing primitives on crypto, more importantly for institutional DeFi and all the cycle that we have been on. So yeah. that's all on my side. I can go over some questions now.